Welcome, I'm John Caldera, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Later on, we're going to be talking to Senator Neville from the Colorado State Legislature. But first, I want to check in on what's known as Article 5 with our great constitutional expert. I always learn something from you, Rob Natelson.
Great to be here.
All right, first, allow me to pimp the one, the only, what the hell is this? The original Constitution. You've actually sold a couple of these.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's the only book that's ever actually paid consistent royalties.
And actually, what's cool about this is we have misconceptions about the Constitution. We all, and we should. People argue over the Bible and the Torah. People obviously are going to argue over this as well.
Yeah, it's written in 18th century English. There's some changes. Mm-hmm. It's written mostly by a bunch of lawyers and who are steeped in 18th century law. Much of the Constitution is in pretty plain language, but a lot of it's not. And you've got to, a guide like this provides you with
but also
full
understanding
meaning.
the terms of the time.
That's right.
That are in. Give me an example of that, by the way.
Sure.
What is something that to our ears means something completely else?
Well, one part of the Constitution talks about privileges and immunities.
Right.
And that has been interpreted by courts and others to mean rights in the Bill of Rights. But that's not what the founders meant by privileges and immunities. They meant special privileges given to people by government, such as your right to attend a state university at a reduced tuition if you're a resident. That's a good example of a privilege or immunity. And it's not until you get back into the 18th century legal documents that becomes clear.
What's fascinating about the work you do is, yeah, you're a lawyer and a scholar, blah, 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 but you get to go back and read some really old stuff. And in fact, you take trips to find the actual pieces of paper so you can better understand what the hell they were talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
What is the coolest thing you've ever gotten your hands on?
The coolest
Besides
thing,
your dad's Playboy magazine, what was the coolest thing?
Might have been an issue of GQ. No.
Yeah.
You know what the coolest thing is? I spent 4 months at Oxford University. And at first they were kind of suspicious of me because at the time I was from Montana.
Right.
Montana, where's that? Eventually, they would come up to me regularly and do little favors for me. And they took me into a room where there was a library. It was the actual library used by Charles Viner, the guy who discovered William Blackstone. And we got hundreds and hundreds of books, and I got an opportunity to actually work in Viner's books. You can see his notes written in the margin. Wow. And so for somebody who likes history,
you have to put on the white gloves before you're allowed to touch
they didn't. They did take precautions, but I didn't have to do that. But for somebody who loves books, who loves history, to be able to actually touch the things that, for example, John Dickinson used when he studied in England, it was quite a kick.
Let me ask you a couple of quick things. One, Neil Gorsuch from the 10th Circuit is coming forward. You like this guy, I like this guy, but he's also ruled on something that you were very involved with, which was this, what I think to be pretty frivolous case against the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, saying that the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is invalid because we schmoes voted on it as electors.
I think it is a frivolous lawsuit. What's amazing, and it's a telling commentary on the federal court, is it's gone on now for almost 6 years.
No.
3 years ago,
man, I can't believe it's been that long.
3 years ago, it went up to the United States Court of Appeals here in Denver, and it should have been dismissed at that point. But for one reason or another, the court elected not to dismiss it. So Judge Gorsuch wrote a powerful dissent, in which he said, this thing has been kicking around for 3 years. The plaintiffs have yet to define exactly why Tabor violates the federal Constitution. They've had 3 years to do so. Can we please dismiss this case? And in doing it, he followed a line of reasoning that we in the Independence Institute had put into a brief for the court. And he also cited one of my articles on the part of the U.S. Constitution that was under consideration.
So obviously the man's a genius.
Yeah, obviously. It's the first time I'd ever been quoted by the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. I'd been cited by U.S. Supreme Court justices a number of times, but never by the 10th Circuit. So, yeah, I'm very favorably disposed toward Judge Gorsuch at this point.
Let's take it to Washington, since he's going there, and I have every hope that and reason to believe will be easily confirmed. But we're frustrated with the federal government, that many of us in the states go, you guys have taken too much power, you're in our lives too much. More importantly, you've exceeded what we think you're limited to in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 says these are the things that government gets to do. The Congress gets to make roads and print money and run the post office and declare war. It doesn't say these other things that you guys love to get involved with, mandating that you must buy health insurance. I mean, we can go all the way through this. You've been one of the leaders on something called the Article 5 movement. Let's just do a real quick recap on that. Okay. What is Article 5?
Article 5 is the part of the Constitution by which the Constitution can be amended. It sets forth the amendment procedure.
And I remember Schoolhouse Rock when I was a kid. So this is where Congress goes to the people and says, hey, can we change the voting age from 21 to 18, goes to the states, enough states say yes, it changes the Constitution, those are the amendments. So this is how the amendment process works.
And we've used amendments in a number of different instances to reform the government. Great example is the Bill of Rights itself. Bill of Rights put into the Constitution limits on what the federal government could do. And you know, we complain sometimes that the Bill of Rights aren't fully enforced, but they're still largely effective after more than 200 years. Much more recent example, we decided we didn't want presidents serving for 3 or 4 or 5 terms in office. So we passed the 22nd Amendment, which limits the president to 2 terms. The problem here is that when you have a dysfunctional federal government where Congress is part of the dysfunction, Congress itself is not motivated to pass an amendment to reform itself. So there is another provision laid out in Article 5 whereby the states can force the calling of a convention, a meeting of the states, so they can propose an amendment that the states then consider being ratified. So that's what the Article 5 movement is trying to get enough states on board so we can have this convention, this meeting, so that the states can consider constitutional amendments that Congress doesn't want to hear about.
Let me draw an analogy. Tell me if it's a good one. We started talking about the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, that we, the people, said, listen, governments, if you're going to raise taxes, we're going to put this limitation on you. You have to ask us first. Mm-hmm. And also, you can't spend more money than population plus inflation growth. That's the limitation without asking us first. Yeah. And so we, through the initiative process, changed the Constitution of Colorado. Is this kind of the same thing where the states can now start a change with the Constitution?
It's actually very perceptive, John. That's exactly right. We don't use the initiative and referendum process for day-to-day business in Colorado. Right. It's designed as a way to correct problems, to correct dysfunctions, to pass things that the legislature won't pass.
When you think about it, without that, we wouldn't have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights because they don't want to limit themselves. We wouldn't have term limits because they don't want to limit themselves. We wouldn't have the open records laws and open meetings laws. We wouldn't have things that I don't agree with, including the spending mandate on education, campaign finance laws. All these things they don't want because it limits what they can do.
And the Article 5 convention process is the same thing at the federal level, except that instead of having a big public vote, it's the state legislatures that act to effectively put an amendment on the ballot.
All right, so this is an idea for the states to rein in the federal government. How many states need to call for this special convention of the states?
2/3 of the states. There are 50 states now, so it's 34 state legislatures.
You've been working pretty diligently over the years, telling states how they go about doing that. Where are we?
We're quite along in the process. I mean, one of the things that I'm happy to report my work did was break a logjam. A lot of people didn't know what the convention process was all about. They didn't know how delegates would be chosen. They wondered if the convention could be controlled. I did a lot of the groundwork, and not alone, but with others, did a lot of the groundwork to make clear how this process works. So, as a result of this, the other day, Wyoming just became the 29th state, remember you need 34, became the 29th state to pass a resolution for a convention to consider a balanced budget amendment. Similarly, day before yesterday, I think it was, or just a few days ago, Arizona passed a resolution for a wider convention, a convention to consider fiscal limits on the federal government, term limits, and and also possibly reduce the jurisdiction or the power of the federal government. So this is rolling along, and it's rolling along, it's accelerating in the process.
All right, so you're telling me that 29 states have called for a convention
On a balanced budget amendment.
on a balanced budget amendment. So my arithmetic's a little fuzzy. So we're talking about 5 more states?
That's right.
Just 5 more states.
Unless, John, unless some of the applications, the state resolutions, are challenged legally and are found to be invalid.
And they will be challenged.
They will be challenged.
They will be challenged.
And I would argue that there are probably 2 that you can't really count toward the 34, but I think the rest of them you can count.
Has this ever been done in American history?
Yes and no. The specific process of calling a convention of states under Article 5 has not been used, but we have had many conventions of states, including conventions of states to suggest constitutional amendments. So the procedure, the process is pretty clear.
Well, no, let me challenge you on that. You say it's pretty clear. If it's never happened before, then how do we know it's clear? I mean, we got almost 250 years of this, and I'm sorry, I've never seen the states call such a thing. I don't even remember reading it in the history books. I was taught it has to go the other way, that Congress brings it to the states. You're saying the states can bring it to Congress, and we're really close to making that happen.
Yeah, we are. This is where the courts come in. The courts tell us that when we interpret Article 5, when we look at words like legislature or convention, we use historical practice for that purpose. We also know from the founding era that this convention is a convention of states. There have been many conventions of states. There were many before the Constitution was written. The U.S. Supreme Court itself has said that a convention like this is a convention of states. So the rules are pretty well established. Now, there could be variations around the edges, but such rules as the convention can be limited, we know that. Each state has 1 vote at the convention, we know that. The convention can only propose an amendment, it can't impose an amendment on us, we know that. So there's a fair amount of clarity on this whole process.
Let me play AM talk show host conspiracy nut. We can't do this, Rob Natelson. Do you understand what an out-of-control constitutional convention would do? This is what the left has been trying to do. They're going to take away our guns. They're going to force dogs and cats to sleep together. This is going to be a terrible thing.
You know where that argument came from, John? It came from the left. That particular argument was first disseminated widely in the 1970s by liberal academics and by people around the Kennedys in order to stop the momentum for a balanced budget. And they were successful. They stopped the momentum for a balanced budget amendment, and now we're $20 trillion in debt.
How did they stop it? Explain that.
They scared people.
Because I remember Birchers going crazy on this idea.
Not in the 70s. They scared people, and they convinced some people on the right, like the John Birch Society, that this was a constitutional convention, which isn't true, that it could run away, which isn't true, that it could impose its will upon the people without any further procedure. That's not true. They made up this stuff in the 19th century, that is to say, the 1970s, liberal establishment folks did in order to neuter the people so they couldn't use this process. John, it's a lot like vote suppression. You don't want African Americans voting. What you do is you spread some rumor that if they vote, they're going to face some kind of horrible threat. And that's exactly what the liberal establishment folks did in the 1970s.
But long story short, we're now only 5 states away.
Yeah, now we're very close, and most people don't believe the scare stories anymore.
Incredible. People want to find more information. Where?
Great place to go is Independence Institute website, independenceinstitute.org, and go to the Constitution page. You'll find writings on this. In addition, the Independence Institute runs something called the Article 5 Information Center. You just enter Article 5 Information Center in your browser, and you'll get all you ever wanted to know about the amendment process.
Rob, thank you. You stay tuned.